Hello and welcome back to another Warcraft video. This time we are going to be covering the most recent episode of WoW Source, covering Warlords of Draenor, and really WoW Source, I know it's staged, like that's the point, and they have things to get over, but I don't know, I think in this one they perhaps did a little bit of a better job going over things, but sometimes things are still really awkward. Anyway, the most important thing is they did cover quite a lot of interesting stuff. We have story things, some talk about garrisons, mythic raiding, new models, and then just a few other random things. It was, it was pretty good. It was something to do while I played Hearthstone. So, general story things, let's talk about this first. They said that they've been talking about Warlords of Draenor for quite a while, and actually, really a few months before Mists of Pandaria launched. And one of the things that was great about this is that it allowed them to really set up Garrosh as a character. Now that's a little bit strange, maybe to some people. They set him up so that he could be a great main villain in Mists of Pandaria, and then a interesting character who gets us into Warlords of Draenor, but then, he takes the back seat. I'm pretty sure that he dies because we have been told that he does not get a redemption arc, and that he is dealt with in questing through the Horde. So I think, yeah, it definitely does make sense that Garrosh is going to die. And it was still nice the way they were able to set him up as a decent character and not really have the next expansion just be a world event that happens and everyone goes, oh crap, there's a new threat, we need to go there. That sort of happens, but at least it's got a little bit more lore backing. With the first two expansions, they burned through Illidan and the Lich King. That's really two very big lore characters there. So what they need to do now is they sort of start adding more characters into the game via expansions and questing and things like that are actually relevant characters to the overarching story of the game instead of completely relying on Warcraft 3. Now, of course, a lot of the actual Warlords of Draenor are from the RTSs, but you know what I mean. In terms of ideas for who we actually fight and who Garrosh's old, or well, I suppose new Horde is going to be, well, there was a bunch of different ones. One of them, which I thought was quite kind of interesting, was the Mongrel Horde. And this was literally an army full of kobolds and gnolls and all the outcast races like the centaurs and things like that we have basically been murdering for the last 9 years now. And, they thought this would be kind of cool, but really, not really as cool as the old Orcish Horde. And then when they did decide in the old Orcish Horde, they weren't sure, well, do we go back in time, or one of the things they were like floating around was, does Garrosh manage to resurrect them or something? And if in that case, are they undead or something like that? It'd be very bizarre, and it just would have confused players. And it seems like Ian Hozakostas is the guy. He's the lead encounter designer. He's responsible, well, at least his team is responsible for a lot of our different raids and things like that. And he came up with the whole time travel idea. Well, not time travel, alternate universe idea. And everyone else rolled with it. And actually, I think they have very good lore backing for it. Okay, there's a few things that just are a little bit contrived, but it's very hard to get things that aren't contrived, especially when you're making an excuse for a whole new expansion to happen, and an excuse for a whole bunch of new zones and things like that. I'm definitely glad they took us off Azeroth. I think it would have been kind of boring to stay in Azeroth for another expansion, because we've been in Azeroth for Northrend, Cataclysm, Mists. That's kind of a lot of being in the same place. Nice to break up the pace, in my opinion. They also were talking about Zangarmarsh a little bit, and early versions of Draenor were not going to use what is now Zangarmarsh for anything. And, the good news is they are using it. One of the people in the art team made this concept art of this giant mushroom, well, the giant mushrooms we know from Zangarmarsh, but under the sea with loads of fish and things like that, like kind of woven through it, and it looked really cool. I'll probably show that. I'll probably have a lot of concept art skimmed through this video anyway. And, because of that, they decided they would use the zone. Now, I'm not actually sure if the Sea of Zangar, which is what it's known as in Draenor, is going to be a zone, like Vashir. I'm 99.9% sure it isn't, because I never really heard it mentioned as a zone. I think it's more just a place in the world. Perhaps we'll get sent there from time to time, but I don't think it's a major quest hub or something like that. Still, it looks very cool, and I'm totally for it being a thing. Just don't force us in there and force us into lots and lots of underwater combat, because it's not fun. Maybe we can go inside the mushrooms and there's something cool in there. They also said that the old Draenor is supposed to feel like a mix of what we know from Outland, but then equally just things that we haven't seen before. That makes complete sense, of course, and you will have a lot of things like that, and a good example is, say, Black Temple. It's now the Temple of Karabor. It's the same location, it's a similar building, but it's very different in its implementation, what it means in the story. Other things like Ockendun and all the various zones which are completely different. An example, Hellfire Peninsula was once a vibrant jungle, and we're going to get to see that in the Tanaan jungle, or Tanaan Forest, whatever it's called. So yeah, overall story for this expansion, it might seem a little bit left field, but I actually think it's going to be very rich in story and very interesting. A lot of the new characters, like, I forget her name, the priestess, the Draenor one. A lot of the new characters they're introducing seem very interesting, and to see alternate universe takes on a lot of these old orcs will be very cool. Another thing is that a lot of these old orcs, they haven't really been revisited much since the games they were in, and those games are old. They're like over 10, 15 years old. So, more than that. So what's nice about that is we get to see a more modern interpretation of those characters, but in a way that doesn't butcher the old lore, which I think is all great. So let's move on to Garrisons, and these are definitely one of the big things in the expansion, and we only really got two things out of this. The first one is about resources and that sort of thing, and the second is about why they're individual. So on resources, a lot of people were worried that these would just be a humongous gold sink or something like that, and they've clarified that it will take gold, but it will also take some sort of garrison resource like wood or stone to upgrade. I'd imagine that wood and stone can be obtained via your followers. I'm sure that your main character will be able to obtain it too, but I'd say that's probably sending your followers on different missions and getting them to work at different buildings and that sort of thing. That is one of your main resources of wood and stone. And then, of course, gold. I think we saw an example of something that cost, it was either 5 or 10,000 gold, but really, that doesn't matter much because the screenshot was from BlizzCon, and a lot of numbers are going to be changed from then until when this actual expansion comes out. Next, they said the garrisons are mostly an individual thing, and this is actually very interesting to me. They said that if it was a guild thing first, then the guild leaders and the higher up members of the guild would be the ones who take all the fun parts. And I suppose you're thinking, well, that's not really true, but I suppose in a way it is. The guild, a lot of those sort of guild systems are very much more accessible to the higher up people in the guild. Things like that. It could just kind of nearly look like it was the cool pad for all the officers and stuff. So I suppose I see where they're coming from. I don't necessarily think it would have been as much of a problem as they thought it could be. I generally find people are not dicks to each other in guilds. Okay, we get the odd bit of drama, but in general, I think that if these were a guild thing, they would have been handled rather well. So that's one thing. However, I think that these will be gilded up in the future. Definitely. I mean, it's just a natural evolution of the mechanic. They just need to make sure that we have this personal thing done first. So while talking about garrisons and why it wasn't player housing and the WoW-specific implementation of this, they said, well, I think it was Hozakostas said, that in a lot of other games with this player housing, you are positioning your sofa, or you're putting up a painting, or a trophy, or something like that. And while that's cool, this is World of Warcraft. They like to do things in a bit of a bigger scale, and they like things that actually fit that whole Warcraft theme. And playing Dollhouse is not a part of that Warcraft theme. That's why they decided to go on the whole, you're building a feckin' base, it's going to be cool, and you're going to have lots of, your own adventurers and people who kind of work for you. That's far more Warcraft-ish, in my opinion. I think it just works quite well. They also were talking about adding some multiplayer mechanics into it. Nothing specific, and they haven't really said much about multiplayer things other than it's a possibility down the line, so we'll see how that goes. Honestly, I think it's best Garrison stay as an individual thing, and perhaps they can make something even cooler for guilds. I think that would be great. Next, let's talk about the new models. So, they unveiled a new model, it's the Undead female, and they said it was far long to be shown off, but the animations and rigging and things like that were not done, so they were kind of in the standard T-shaped sort of thing that they use for all the texturing and just making the model itself. I thought it looked kind of cool. I saw someone in the comments of the video saying it looked like Jessie J at a point, and I thought that was hilarious because I know, not into that whole music-y thing. Yeah, I mean, it looks cool. There'll be some stuff up on the screen for you to have a look at. It's more of a personal thing. I've never been too much into the undead. Yeah, something about me doesn't like bones sticking out of my character, but that's completely personal preference. So if you do have a female undead character, what do you think about this model? It'd be nice to know. They were also talking about just general model things in general, I suppose, and they said that there was once a bug with the human female eye, and what happened is the eye looked very slightly different. It was like this little twitch on the blink. and because of this, they actually got bombarded with people talking about it and trying to get it fixed, and it was really just a bug that came in with their rigging system. I think that's what Chilton said. But anyway, that's why they said they're being very careful with these new models, because people are very attached to their character model. Some people have had their character for 9 years. Okay, very few people. Most people, I'd say around the sort of maybe 3 to 6 year mark would cover the most of the population. So it's definitely they're playing with fire in a way, but they're playing with a fire that's about to smolder out and fizzle, because these things are so damn old and they need to do it, so they may as well do it justice. And it seems like they're at least taking this in the right way. Now, for other things, cloaks, these are something which have been a bit of a personal issue for me, in that I play a Draenor, so obviously I have my character has a tail, and that makes a lot of problems with cloaks. It's not cool when your tail clips through your cloak. Your cloak. I don't have coke in my character, seriously. Anyway, so, yeah, they're apparently going to be fixing these up. What they showed us was a basic version where they've been changing the alpha of different layers of the cloak. Alpha is essentially transparency, just leave it at that. And, yeah, I mean, it looked kind of cool. They'll be able to do interesting things with that. Although, personally, my biggest gripe is the fact that the cloaks do not feel fluid. They did say they sort of implied, they'll be doing a little bit of work in fluidity and that sort of thing. And the art guy there, I've completely forgotten, blanked on his name, he said that the model's really tired and it needs to be improved, and I absolutely agree. In terms of how to actually roll out the new character models, well, it seems like what they're going to do is let you opt in and opt out, so you can see the old ones for performance reasons, and the new ones if you just want your game to look cooler. The thing about this is it not just affects characters, it will also affect NPCs in the world, so it's a little bit like, I think a great example is changing the water from the old pre-Cataclysm water to the post-Cataclysm water. It's just a slider, and I think that's great. And it's good that NPCs will also benefit from this, because obviously it would be a little bit jarring if our players look really cool, and the NPCs just don't match it at all. So there you go, new models, garrisons, and the story covered. Let's move on to Mythic raiding. So, just a little catch-up for those of you who don't know about the system. Well, they've been moving around all the different raid levels and difficulties and that sort of thing. So in Mists of Pandaria, we had flexible difficulty, which was from 10 to 25 players. We had normal, which is 10 and 25, and then heroic, which is 10 and 25. And for the longest time, this was really okay, but they're changing it up in Cataclysm. Flexible has now been named normal. The reason for that is because, well, it was the most popular raid difficulty, so it should be called normal, right? What used to be called normal is now called heroic, and both Warlords of Draenor normal and heroic are going to be flexible from 10 to 25 players. And Mists of Pandaria heroic has been replaced with a new raid tier called Mythic. And they have made Mythic a 20-player size. Now the reason for this is because, well, they had knocked around the idea of 15, but they thought that the main issue here was that they were going to be asking for 10-player guilds to grow, so they decided that instead of just cutting it halfway and making it 15, I mean halfway in terms of, well, we'll only do a small increase. No, they thought, we may as well do the increase that will result with what we think, as designers, is going to allow us to make the best bosses. And a few different reasons for that are that they can assume you have one of every single class. They can very much tailor abilities to work for only one raid size. As an example, in the normal sort of like 10-25 thing that we have going on at the minute, there's a bit of a disparity where some fights are easier in 10, some are easier in 25, because just the different numbers of players and that sort of thing. By having 20, it means that there can be far more complex mechanics, and this makes sense because it's the most challenging raid content. Essentially, from their perspective, it's all about locking it down so that it's a very fixed size, they know exactly the variables going in, therefore they can design specifically around that to give these high-end raiders some bespoke content. Now the problem for that is that, well, if you're a 10-player raiding group, you need to double in size. Double! That's hard, That's really hard to do. And then if you're 25, you need to drop a few people out of your roster. It's just hard. Either that or have more people going on a kind of rotation basis. Honestly, it's hard for both groups, really. I suppose a bit harder for the 10s. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that a lot of guilds will be recruiting because of this change, and a lot of people will perhaps be leaving 25s, so the overall raiding population for Mythics will initially be the same, but there's a lot of movement, and the best time for recruiting people is always at the start of the expansion, so therefore, it's probably going to be easier than most people think to find players, but it will certainly still be a challenge. It's very strange, this whole thing. If you are a 10 or 25 player heroic raider, what do you think? I know this sounds like there's points where I'm just like randomly harvesting opinions to get comments, but actually the reason I do that is because I cannot play every part of this game, and to be able to get opinions from people, it just really helps me round out my commentary and what I think about different things. And finally, for some other little things, they said that the free boost to level 90 won't expire. And when they say won't expire, it's not like, oh, for the first 30 days after your account, you have a boost to use. It's not like that. Basically, it's one thing that's applied to your account, and there is no level requirement. So you can use it on level 1, you can use it on level 89, but that would be really silly. Or either that, or you just really hate the Dread Waste, in which case, I totally get it. Now, this is fair enough, I think. The real idea for this is that once you get Warlords of Draenor, you jump in, you can level a character up to 90, and you can get straight into the new content. There is one thing which is very important to know, and I think it's something a lot of people don't know, and it's that you're put into a zone a little bit like with Death Knights, where you start off with a very limited amount of abilities, but over time, through this zone, you'll unlock more abilities. So yes, it's a fast track to 90, and it will attempt to teach you your abilities and that sort of thing. However, how successful this will be, we honestly can't say, we just don't know. As for this boost being a thing in the Blizzard store, it was rumoured about, but we don't have any solid, information to talk about. And finally, they said that in Ashran you'll be able to collect scraps of armour from your defeated opponents, and use them to build things like strong armour, a vehicle, or launch a wave of NPCs at your enemies. I think that sounds very interesting, especially the latter option of launching waves of NPCs. You could coordinate this in, especially if you were doing Ashran with your guild, you could coordinate launching waves of NPCs or a vehicle with an assault on an enemy base. It sounds really cool, and it might actually get me into PvP. But anyway, that's really the whole spiel for this thing. It was a very interesting talk, and hopefully they do more of them. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.